Frank Vandenberg propped himself against the wall of the loading dock and surveyed the action before him. One by one, workers disappeared into the truck and emerged shortly thereafter with a handful of boxes. "Keep it moving, boys," Frank shouted, taking a sip of coffee. "We have another shipment coming in at any minute." "You got it, boss," one of the workers responded without glancing toward Frank's direction. Frank heard the unmistakable groan of a large truck's brakes and peeked around the rig, parked in the bay. The next shipment had arrived. A little sooner than he expected. He glanced at his watch and then looked around the warehouse. Spotting no one in the vicinity, he made the executive decision to unload a few of the remaining boxes from the truck himself. He strode inside to the back of the rig, lifted one of the boxes, and then immediately dropped it to the floor. He winced in pain and fell to his knees, shouting a profanity that echoed off the walls of the interior. A man holding a clipboard sprinted toward the commotion. "Jesus! Frank! What the hell did you do?" "I was trying to help," Frank responded, lifting himself onto one knee. "My fucking back went out again." "Damn it, Frank. I told you not to do that again," the man said, helping Frank to his feet. "Now get the hell out of here." "But we have another shipment coming in," Frank protested. "I said get out of here. You're done for the day. We got this. Go lie down somewhere. That's an order." Frank looked at his supervisor and nodded silently. Clutching his lower back, he hobbled toward the door and exited the warehouse. By the time he reached the entrance to his apartment building, he could barely walk. Pain radiated along his lower back and down along his left leg. With a noticeable limp, he entered the building and strode down the hall. He had just inserted his key into the lock when he heard the sound that would change his life forever. It was the unmistakable sound of his wife in mid-orgasm. "Oh God," he faintly heard as he pressed his ear to the door. "Oh yes! Oh, that's amazing! Oh yes!" The numbers on the door before him became blurry. A venomous rage boiled within him, causing his stomach to churn. He could taste the bile at the back of his throat. Trembling with anger, he slowly turned the key. Suddenly, he released the key and stumbled backward into the hallway, smashing into the opposite wall with a thud. "Damn," he whispered to himself. "That deceitful liar. That unfaithful, dishonest person. How could she do this?" A door cracked open beside him, and man peeked his head into the hallway. "Everything okay, Frank?" the man asked. Frank turned to face him. His face reddened and his jaw and fists clenched. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. "No, it's not okay, Walt," he said, trying his best to keep his voice down. "My unfaithful wife is over there with some other guy. That deceitful woman is cheating on me." Walt's eyes widened, and he scratched his chin and scanned both ends of the hallway. "Shit, Frank. Listen, why don't you come inside and calm down for a minute? I don't want you doing anything you might regret later." Walt took him by the shoulder and gently guided him inside his room, closing the door behind him. He pulled out a chair at a small table, and Frank sat, his expression consumed with fury. Walt placed a glass in front of him, and then sat across the table with one of his own. "Tell me what happened," Walt said. "I came home early," Frank said, taking a healthy swig from his glass. "She wasn't expecting me. I was just about to turn that key when I heard them in there." He jerked his thumb toward the door. "Yeah, what did you hear?" "Luann!" She was screaming and yelling while some guy was with her. It sounded like he was being rough. "She was in the middle of it when I got to the door." "Damn, Frank. I don't know what to say. Luann doesn't seem like the type to cheat on you. Are you sure about this?" Frank stared straight into his neighbor's eyes. "You don't think I know what my wife sounds like when she's having an orgasm?" Walt waved his hands in defense. No, Frank. That's not what I meant. What are you gonna do?" "I'll tell you what I'm gonna do," Frank said, taking another big gulp of liquor. "I'm gonna finish this drink. Then, I'm gonna go across the hallway and beat the living shit out of whoever is there with my wife. Then I'm gonna divorce her and take everything she has. Now, hold on, Frank, Walt said. You gotta think this through. If you go over there all half-cocked, she could use that to claim you're violent. File a restraining order and get full custody of the kids. You need to be smart about this. Do it the right way. Frank sat back in his chair and winced in pain. Only 9 years old. He wouldn't understand what was happening, and he needed his father to guide him through the years ahead and warn him about women like his mother. Divorce was imminent. There was no doubt about that. It would happen on his terms, though. Knowing what he now knew, he held the upper hand. "Frank, are you in?" Frank raised his head and paused for a moment to consider the question. His focus returned to the matter at hand, and he perused the cards he held in his hands. He nudged a plastic chip into the center of the table. "You okay, Vandy?" said the man to his right. "Frank had a rough day last week," Walt explained, tossing a chip onto the pile. "He found out his wife, Luann, is cheating on him." This elicited a collective gasp from the group of men seated around the table. "Shit, Frank," Jackson said. "That's harsh, man. Did you kill the bitch or what?" The action of the card game paused as the group leaned in to hear Frank's response. "No, I didn't kill her," he said. "In fact, I didn't even mention it to her." "Well, why not?" Arthur said, shaking his head in disgust. "If it were me, I would have killed her. Don't tell me you're turning into one of those wimpy, willing cucks." The other men chuckled while Frank stared intently at his hand. He tossed another chip into the pile. "Of course not. I'm playing it smart." "How so, Vandy?" Arthur asked. "Well, I started by contacting Ray. You know Ray, the guy who owns the electronics store. He gave me a deal on one of those video cameras they use for security. It was pretty expensive, but at this point, money is no object." "Yeah? What did you do with it?" Jackson asked. "Well, I had Ray install it in our bedroom, facing the bed." The men chuckled again and exchanged knowing grins. "I know who she's banging," Frank continued. "I knew when she started this new job it would lead to no good. Sure enough, she's banging this scumbag who works with her. I got it all on tape." "No shit," Arthur said. "You actually saw them together?" Frank nodded. "I sure did. I sat and watched them for a full hour, going at it like a couple of horny monkeys. They can't get enough of each other." "Holy shit," Jackson said with a slight laugh. "Give us some details, man. What were they doing?" Frank cocked his head and squinted his eyes. "Why the fuck do you want to know that?" "I'm just curious," Jackson responded. He looked at the pot of chips in the center of the table and tossed his cards face down. "You don't have to tell us if you don't want to." Frank looked across the table at Walt and studied his expression. "I call," he said, and displayed his cards to the group. "Well, shit," Walt responded, slamming his cards down. Frank smirked and gathered the chips toward him, stacking them by color. "She led him straight to the bed," Frank said, continuing to stack his chips, practically pushed him onto the bed, yanked down his pants, and inhaled his banana. "Damn," Jackson said, shaking his head. "That cheating whore!" "She sucked him for a good 5-10 minutes, Frank continued. "Is he big?" Walt asked. Frank's face contorted into a grimace, and he stared across the table for a moment, cocking his head to the side. "Now why the fuck would you ask that? Are you some kind of fucking queer?" Walt's face reddened as the other guys laughed. "What? No, I was just asking, that's all." "Well, they didn't bring a ruler to bed, you homo," Frank said with a smirk. He collected the cards before him and fanned them out before tossing another chip into the pot. "But if I had to guess, I'd say it was a good 7 or 8 inches. Now, as I was saying, she sucked him a good long time." "Sorry, Frank," Walt said, lowering his head. Jackson and Arthur burst out laughing. "Anyway, I got it all on tape," Frank concluded. He surveyed his next hand and flipped a chip onto the pile with his thumb. "So what now, Frank?" Jackson asked. "Well now, I used that tape for leverage against her. I withdrew half of our savings from the bank. It wasn't much, but it's still mine. I opened a new account, and I've started depositing my paychecks from the warehouse into that account. I met with a lawyer and had him draft a separation agreement." "What's in the agreement?" Arthur asked. "She has to move out. That's first and foremost. I'm not going anywhere. I'm getting full custody of the kids. She can have weekend visitation. I'm not a heartless bastard. Because she makes more than I do, I included some child support in there as well." "You think she'll go for it?" Jackson asked. "Oh, she will when I confront her about all of this," Frank said. "Yeah, when is that happening?" "This weekend," Frank responded. "See, I caught a little something on that tape, after they were done. Apparently, he's getting a hotel room for the weekend. That girl told me she's having a girls' spa weekend in the city." Walt added, "How stupid can she be?" Frank nodded. "Yep, so I've gone along with it all week, pretending like I don't know anything. She must think I'm an idiot, but she'll find out exactly how much of an idiot I am this weekend." Walt held the deck of cards in his hands and stared across the table. Jackson's and Arthur's eyes were fixed on the same spot. Frank sat motionless in his chair, his head cocked backward, staring at the ceiling with his mouth gaped open. Walt broke away from his gaze and swiveled his head between his two friends to each side. "Frank," Walt said. There was no response. "Frank," Walt repeated. At last, Frank jolted to consciousness. He looked at his three friends with unfocused eyes. "What? Are you gonna deal or what?" Walt hesitated, exchanging glances with his friends once more. "You gotta tell us, Frank. We're dying to know. What happened this weekend at the hotel?" Frank appeared confused for a moment, but then a smile crept across his face. "Oh, it was beautiful, fellas," he said. "I got to the hotel at around 8 o'clock. I figured that had given them enough time to get started, I walked right up to the front desk, all cool and casual, and asked the cute-looking girl behind the desk to connect me with Joe Swanson's room." "Joe Swanson? That's the guy?" Arthur asked. "That's the guy," Frank said. "Luann had mentioned his first name at one point. I got his last name off the company directory." "Smart thinking, Vandy," Jackson added. Frank smiled. "Anyway, this scumbag answers the phone. He's breathing all heavy and shit. Of course I knew why. So I says, 'Sorry to interrupt, but could you put my wife on the phone?'" "No way," Walt said, slapping the table with his palm and grinning broadly. Frank chuckled. "Yep, that's what I said. He pretended he had no idea what I'm talking about. So I told him, either you put my wife on the phone or I call your wife and tell her where you are and what you're doing." "No way," Walt said. "The asshole is married?" "I noticed his wedding ring during the second or third time I watched the video," Frank said. Walt shook his head and smiled at his friends. "Smart, Frank. So fucking smart." "So he puts her on the phone," Frank continued. "Of course, she sounds like she's gonna shit her pants. Her voice is all shaky, and I say, 'Bitch, we're done.' Of course, she tells me it's not what it seems. Yada, 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 yada. Bunch of bullshit. I tell her if she wants to explain herself, she can meet me back at home when she collects her stuff." "Attaboy, Vandy," Arthur said, exchanging grins with his friends. "I hightailed it back home, and she comes through the door not 5 minutes later." "Damn straight," Jackson added. "Of course." She starts spewing bullshit lie after bullshit lie, denying she's doing anything wrong, claiming she just happened to meet her coworker at this hotel during her girls' spa weekend. That's when I held up the videotape. That shut her up quickly. I told the cheating whore the terms of my agreement. I gave her the papers my lawyer drew up. I told her if she doesn't gather her shit and leave immediately, I'm going to show that tape to her daughter and all her friends at work. So that tape to her daughter and all her friends at work, so that they all know what a cheating she is." Arthur and Jackson exchanged a high-fi across the table, while Walter was left hanging. "Janie's going through this rebellious stage and hates her mother anyway, but I know that one cut right through her. Of course, Luann breaks down into tears like a little bitch, smearing her makeup all over her face, looking like the cheap woman that she is. Snots running down her nose and into her lying mouth, begging me to forgive her, actually dropping to her knees and clinging to my legs. Oh, it was a beautiful sight." "So, did she leave?" Arthur asked. "Damn straight she did," Frank said. "It took all of my willpower not to kick her in the arse as she went out that door. Let me tell you," the group burst out laughing. "So what now, Vandy?" Jackson asked. "Well, I gotta sit the kids down and break the news to them. You know, tell them Mommy and Daddy still love them, and all that. Of course, the court will decide where they go, and I'm sure the kids will have to choose. I have no doubt that Janie will stay with me. We'll follow her. He's always looked up to his big sister and wants to do whatever she does." "Damn, Frank, you really made the best of a bad situation," Walt said. He began dealing the cards. Frank gathered together the pile in front of him, fanned them out, and smiled. There was a knock at the door. Frank lay in bed, still and quiet. Another knock followed. A voice could be heard from the other side of the door. A key rattled in the lock before the door opened. A lone figure made its way to the other end of the room, where Frank was positioned beneath the window, with his back facing the door, curled into a fetal position. The woman, dressed in white, from head to toe, jostled him by the shoulder. "Mr. Vandenberg," she said. He remained motionless. She pressed a pair of fingers to a spot on his neck and paused for a moment. She heaved a sigh and shook her head and then fished a cell phone from her pocket. "Amanda," she said into the phone. "Mr. Vandenberg from room 311 has passed. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Jane responded, shaking the man's hand. The man then proceeded down the line and shook the hand of the man standing next to her. "So sorry for your loss," he repeated. "Thank you," Marty said, "and thank you for doing what you did for my dad. I know he really enjoyed it." "Who was that?" Jane asked after the man departed. "Jay, I think his name is," Marty responded. Jay Moore. He worked in the supplies department. He used to let Dad back there sometimes. I guess it brought back memories of the warehouse. "I thought he hated that warehouse," Jane said with a sigh. It reminded him of his failure. "He didn't fail," Marty protested. "Things just didn't work out the way he planned. He was supposed to take over the business from Grandpa. Then Grandpa died, and the business collapsed, and Dad found himself out of work. He took the best job he could find." "Yes, I know," Jane said with annoyance. "I was there for the whole thing. You came along at the tail end." Marty sighed and gazed out the window. His eyes sparkled with youth, but the grey hair along his temples revealed his true age. Another man approached and offered his condolences. "Janie, this is Matthew," Marty said. "Matthew Fitzhenry," he responded, shaking Jane's hand. "I'm so sorry we had to meet this way. There was a thin plastic tube fed inside each of his nostrils, and he reeked of urine." "How did you know my father?" Jane asked, surreptitiously, wiping her hand along her pant leg. "Oh, we hung out together all the time," Matthew responded. "We usually ate lunch and dinner together and played poker once a week. Of course, he always referred to me as Arthur. It didn't matter to me, though. I took no offense. You know, although your father's memory went a long time ago, that man never forgot how to play poker. He was just merciless on all of us." "I'm glad to hear that," Jane said. Another man approached. He was tall and dark-skinned, with a mostly bald head covered with flecks of white. "Randy," he said, extending his large hand toward Jane. but your dad always called me Jackson for some reason. I suppose he must have known a black guy named Jackson at some point." He chuckled to himself, and then coughed. "It's good to see you again," Marty said, shaking Randy's hand. "How is your painting coming along?" Randy smiled broadly. "It's a slow and steady process, but it's coming along. There are 7 of us working on it now." "You need 7 people to create one painting?" Jane asked. Randy shook his head. "Nah, it's just paint by numbers. It's mostly me doing the painting, but I like to have the others around to let me know when I'm painting outside the lines." Jane nodded her head slowly, but it was evident she was humoring him. Randy excused himself, and soon thereafter another man plodded slowly toward them with the aid of a walker. "Jane, this is—" "You can just call me Walt," the man said, extending his hand. "I prefer to remain anonymous. You never know who might be listening around here." Jane and Marty exchanged curious looks as Walt surveyed his surroundings. "I just want to tell you both, I cherished your father deeply," Walt continued. "He was a good man, and he had such a vivid imagination. Why, the other fellas and I just loved it when he would tell his stories. He had a new one ready for us all the time, and we would enjoy it so much. He really had a way with words." "I didn't know Dad had a creative side to him," Jane said. "What type of stories would he tell?" Well, Walt began with some hesitance. All of his stories were about the same thing, but he would change things here and there to keep it interesting. "And what were they about?" Jane pressed. Walt looked at Marty, and then back at Jane. "I don't mean any disrespect to your mom." "Oh, you can freely disrespect her," Jane interrupted. "That's fine with me." Walt smiled. "Well, okay then. See, his stories were all about your mom cheating on him. He would get so angry, you should have seen him. And boy, sometimes he'd get so angry, he'd end up killing her. In his stories, mind you. Most times, he would just tell us all about how he left her, how he got his revenge, how he divorced her, and things of that nature." "And you actually enjoyed listening to the same stories over and over again?" Marty asked. "We sure did." "Can I ask, why?" Walt appeared confused for a moment and looked from one sibling to the other. "Well, I guess you could say we formed something of a club. We all have ex-wives, you see, and they all screwed us over royally. Of course, in real life, we never got our revenge, and our ex-wives ended up with everything. But in Frank's stories, Luann would always get her comeuppance, and Frank would always end up happily ever after with someone much prettier and nicer. I guess you can say we all got our vicarious revenge through your father's stories." Marty cocked his head to the side and squinted. "How sad," he observed. "Yes, well, whatever it takes to get this old man's blood flowing again, you know." They watched as Walt slowly proceeded toward the open casket to pay his respects. Marty glanced over to the other side of the room where his wife and children quietly sat and stared at their cell phones. Jane followed his line of vision and smiled. "How are they doing?" she asked. Marty smiled. "They're good. Ben is finishing up his senior year and will get his degree in the spring. Katie is working at a hospital in the city." "I'm very happy for you," Jane stated. "And how is Samantha?" Jane sighed. "Probably stripping at a club somewhere, or off living in a camper with her deadbeat father. Who knows?" "I'm sorry," Marty said. "Don't be. It's what happens when you grew up in a dysfunctional family like ours. If Mom hadn't left us to run off with that asshole, I imagine all our lives would be very different today." "Janie, that was 30 years ago. You have to let it go." "Let it go. I'm 45 years old. I've been divorced twice already, and I can't see husband number 3 showing up anytime soon. I'm going to live the rest of my days alone, and it's all that woman's fault." "How is it her fault?" "She chose her lover over her family. What type of woman does that? And what type of impression do you think that left on me? Everything I know about marriage, I learned from that woman. She had her reasons for leaving Dad. Janie, you can't keep blaming her for the choices you've made in life. Easy for you to say, Mr. Perfect. Happily married, with 2 wonderful kids. You'll never end up in a place like this, surrounded by creepy old men. She waved her hands and swiveled her head around the room, and then froze in place. With her hands still held in the air, her jaw dropped and her eyes widened. I cannot believe she showed up here. The woman strode toward them, looking solemn, yet smiling politely. Still beautiful in her old age, she was dressed immaculately and carried herself with a quiet dignity. She kissed and hugged Marty, and then turned toward her daughter. "Jane, it's good to see you," Luann said. "It's been a long time." "I can't believe you have the nerve to come to this," Jane said. "He was my husband," Luann said, "and the father of my children. Of course I'm here to pay my respects just like everyone else." "Respects," Jane repeated with a laugh. "You never respected him a day in your life." Luann shook her head sadly. "Your father was a very different man when we married. He was funny and confident and driven to succeed. He had plans for his future, and I was so happy that he wanted me to be a part of that future. We were very happy together in the beginning, but that all changed when your grandfather died." "Yeah, you mean the money died," Jane spat. "As soon as that business went under, you started heading for the door." "That wasn't a factor," Luann stated. "I promised to be true to your father for richer or poorer. I loved that man and would have lived in a cardboard box with him if it came to that. But he changed, Jane. I know you don't want to believe it, but he did. He became angry and bitter, and the depression ate away at him from the inside out. He was drunk more often than not, and he became verbally abusive, both to me and you kids." "He was a good father," Jane insisted. Luann nodded. "He was. For a while. But, Jane, he became a danger to himself and to our family." "Oh, so you left him to protect us then? Is that it? It had nothing to do with Joe?" "I fell in love with Joe while I was still married to your father. That's true. In my mind, my marriage was already over by then. For a while, I thought it was best to remain married for the sake of you kids. I tried to work it out with your father, but he was too far gone. He wouldn't listen to me, and he refused to work on our marriage. When I started earning more than he did, he became jealous and more abusive. Well, thank God for Joe swooping in and saving the day, huh?" "I didn't mean to fall in love with him, Jane. No one ever means to fall in love. It just happens. It's important for you to know, though, that we didn't act on those feelings until after our divorces were settled. Despite what your father has told you, I never betrayed him." "Bullshit," Jane spat. The 2 women stood for a moment, staring at each other. The daughter's expression was filled with rage, while the mother's showed pity. At last, Luann turned to face her son. "Thank you for everything you did for him," she said. "I know how difficult it must have been for you, but I know that your father appreciated having you visit him so often." "Even though he didn't always know who I was," Marty chuckled. "And when he did recognize me, he thought I was 9 years old." Luann smiled. "He always loved you, Marty." They embraced once more, and Luann strode toward the casket. She lowered herself to her knees and placed her hands gently on the side of the casket. She placed a hand on her ex-husband's chest and held it there for a moment. As she gazed at his face, her eyes watered and she swallowed hard. "My sweet husband," she whispered. "After all this time, the anger is gone. You finally found peace." That's the end of this story. If you found it engaging, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.